A woman stands alone on a barren Montana platform in 1876. Her fiancé gone, her money almost spent, her future shattered in the span of an afternoon. The only man offering help is a stranger whose motives she can't yet read. What happens next will force her to choose between the safety of everything she knows and the terrifying freedom of a life she never imagined. If you want to see how far survival can take someone when betrayal becomes the catalyst for transformation, stay with me until the end, and drop a like and comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The stagecoach lurched to a stop, and Elena Cross felt her stomach drop with it. She'd been holding herself together for 3 days. Through dust storms and bad road and cramped quarters with strangers who smelled like sweat and tobacco. She'd kept her chin up, kept her hands folded in her lap, kept telling herself that once she got to Ridgeway Depot, everything would be fine. Thomas would be waiting. Thomas, who'd written her all those letters. Thomas who'd promised her a home, a future, a life better than the one she was leaving behind in Boston. The door swung open, and the driver, a grizzled man with a face like old leather, stuck his head in. Ridgeway Depot. End of the line, miss. Elena stepped down onto the platform, gripping her carpetbag with both hands. The air smelled like pine and dirt, and something sharper, smoke, maybe, or metal. Mountains rose in the distance, jagged and indifferent. The depot itself was barely more than a shed with a crooked sign, and beyond it, a collection of rough buildings sprawled along a muddy street. This was Ridgeway. This was where her new life was supposed to start. She scanned the platform. A few men loitered near the freight wagons, talking in low voices. A woman in a faded dress hurried past with a basket. No one looked at her. No one seemed to be waiting. No Thomas. Elena's heartbeat picked up. She set down her bag and smoothed her skirt, trying to look composed. He was probably just running late, or maybe he hadn't gotten the telegram about which coach she'd be on. That had to be it. She waited. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The driver finished unloading the freight and climbed back onto his seat. He glanced at her, then away. You got someone meeting you, miss? Yes, Elena said quickly, too quickly. He'll be here. The driver didn't look convinced, but he tipped his hat and snapped the reins. The stagecoach rolled away, leaving her standing there alone. The sun was starting to sink. Shadows stretched long across the platform. Elena's hands felt cold despite the warmth of the day. She reached into her bag and pulled out the last letter Thomas had sent, creased and worn from being read too many times. I'll be waiting for you at the depot, he'd written. We'll be married within the week. Everything is ready. She read it again, as if the words might change. They didn't. A man in a dusty coat walked past, glanced at her, then stopped. You lost, miss. Elena straightened her shoulders. I'm waiting for someone. Been standing there a while, the man said. He wasn't unkind, just matter of fact. Who you waiting on? Thomas Gentry, she said. The name felt strange in her mouth now, like something borrowed. The man's expression shifted. Not much, just a flicker of something she couldn't read. Thomas Gentry. Yes. Do you know him? I know of him. The man scratched his jaw. Haven't seen him around in a few days, though. Heard he left town. The words didn't land right away. Elena blinked. Left town? Yep, headed east, I think. Maybe a week ago. Her stomach twisted. That's not possible. He's supposed to meet me here. She stopped herself. We're getting married. The man looked at her for a long moment, and in his eyes, she saw something worse than pity. She saw recognition, like he'd seen this before. Sorry, miss, he said quietly. But if Thomas Gentry told you he'd be here, he lied. He walked away before she could respond. Elena stood there, frozen. The platform felt like it was tilting under her feet. She looked down at the letter in her hand, at Thomas's cramped handwriting, at all the promises he'd made. A wave of nausea rolled through her. He wasn't coming. He'd left. She had no idea why. No idea what had changed. But the reality settled over her like a weight. She was alone, in a town she didn't know, with barely enough money to last a week. Her knees felt weak. She sat down on her bag right there on the platform and pressed her hands to her face. She wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. Shock, maybe. Or just exhaustion. She didn't know how long she sat there. Long enough for the platform to empty. Long enough for the sun to dip below the mountains. long enough for the cold to start seeping in. Then she heard footsteps. She looked up. A man stood a few feet away, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a worn leather jacket and a hat pulled low. He had the kind of face that didn't give much away: strong jaw, weathered skin, eyes that looked like they'd seen more than they cared to talk about. He was watching her, but not the way the other men had. Not curious, not leering, just noticing. "You all right?" he asked. Elena's first instinct was to say yes, to tell him she was fine, that someone was coming, that she didn't need help. But the words stuck in her throat. "No," she said instead. Her voice cracked. "Not really." The man glanced around, then back at her. "You waiting on someone?" "I was." She looked down at the letter, still clutched in her hand. "But he's not coming." The man didn't ask for details. He just nodded, like that was answer enough. "You got a place to stay?" Elena hesitated. She didn't know this man, didn't know if she could trust him, but she also didn't have a lot of options. "No," she admitted. He was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he said, "There's a boarding house in town, run by a woman named Mrs. Callahan. She's got rooms and she's fair. I can take you there if you want." Elena studied him. He didn't look dangerous, didn't look like he wanted anything from her. But then again, Thomas hadn't looked like a liar either. "Why would you do that?" she asked. The man shrugged. "Because you're stranded and it's getting dark, and because someone should." It wasn't a grand gesture, wasn't poetry, but something about the plainness of it made her believe him. She stood up, brushing off her skirt. "All right." He picked up her bag without asking, and she followed him off the platform. The walk into town was short, but felt longer. Elena kept glancing at the man, trying to figure him out. He didn't talk much, just led the way, steady and unhurried, like he had nowhere more important to be. "What's your name?" she asked finally. "Wade," he said. "Wade Callahan." "Callahan." She frowned. "Like the boarding house?" "My sister runs it." That eased some of the tension in her chest. If he was taking her to his sister's place, it was probably safe. Probably. They turned onto a street lined with clapboard buildings. A general store, a saloon, a blacksmith shop. Everything looked rough and temporary, like the town had been thrown together in a hurry and never bothered to settle in properly. Men stood outside the saloon drinking and talking loud. A few of them looked at her as she passed, and she lowered her gaze. Wade didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he just didn't care. "How long you been here?" Elena asked, more to fill the silence than anything. "Long enough." "You like it?" He glanced at her. "It's not Boston." She stopped walking. "How did you know I was from Boston?" Wade didn't look surprised. "Your dress, your shoes, the way you talk. You got city written all over you." Elena didn't know whether to be offended or impressed. "I suppose that's fair." They walked a little farther, and then Wade stopped in front of a 2-story house with peeling paint and a sagging porch. A sign hung over the door, "Callahan House, rooms by the night or week." Wade pushed the door open and stepped inside. Elena followed. The interior was plain but clean. Wooden floors, simple furniture, a smell of bread and coffee. A woman stood near the stove, wiping her hands on an apron. She was older than Wade, maybe in her mid-30s, with dark hair pulled back in a bun and eyes that looked like they didn't miss much. "Wade?" she said, surprised. Then she saw Elena. "Who's this?" "Woman who got left at the depot," Wade said simply. "Figured you might have a room." The woman, Mrs. Callahan, Elena assumed, looked her over, not unkindly, but thoroughly. "You got money?" Elena reached into her bag and pulled out the small purse she'd been guarding for days. "Some. Not much." Mrs. Callahan nodded. "I can give you a room for a week. After that, we'll figure something out. You got a name?" "Elena Cross." "Well, Miss Cross, welcome to Ridgeway." She gestured toward the stairs. "Second door on the left. I'll bring up some supper in a bit." Elena felt something loosen in her chest. Not relief, exactly, but close. "Thank you." Mrs. Callahan waved her off. "Thank Wade. He's the one who dragged you here." Elena turned to Wade, who was already halfway to the door. "Thank you," she said again. He paused, tipped his hat. "Good luck, Miss Cross." And then he was gone. Elena stood there for a moment, staring at the closed door. She didn't know what to make of him, didn't know what to make of any of this. But for the first time since she'd stepped off that stagecoach, she didn't feel quite so alone. The room was small, just a bed, a washstand, and a chair, but it was clean, and the sheets smelled like soap. Elena sat on the edge of the bed and finally let herself cry. Not loud, not long, just enough to let some of the pressure out. When Mrs. Callahan came up with a tray of stew and bread, she didn't say anything, just set it down and left. Elena ate slowly, mechanically. The food was good, but she barely tasted it. Her mind was still back at the depot, still trying to make sense of what had happened. Thomas had left. That much was clear. But why? Had he met someone else? Had he lost his nerve? Or had he never meant any of it in the first place? She didn't know. And maybe she never would. The thought made her angry. Not sad. Angry. She'd given up everything for him. Left her family, left her job, left the only life she'd ever known. And he just walked away. She finished the stew and set the tray aside. Then she lay down on the bed, still fully dressed, and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow, she'd figure out what to do. Tomorrow, she'd make a plan. But tonight, she just needed to survive. Morning came too soon. Elena woke to the sound of footsteps in the hallway and voices downstairs. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back. She sat up, her body stiff and sore. She hadn't slept well. Every time she'd closed her eyes, she'd seen Thomas's face, heard his voice in her head. "Everything is ready." The lie echoed. She washed her face in the basin, changed into a fresh dress, and went downstairs. Mrs. Callahan was in the kitchen, frying eggs. A man Elena didn't recognize sat at the table, reading a newspaper. He glanced up when she entered, then went back to his reading. "Morning," Mrs. Callahan said without turning around. "You sleep?" "A little." "Coffee's on the stove. Help yourself." Elena poured herself a cup and sat down at the table. The coffee was strong and bitter, but it helped. "So," Mrs. Callahan said, flipping an egg. "What's your plan?" Elena hesitated. "I don't know yet." "You got family back east?" "Yes, but I can't go back." "Why not?" Elena stared into her coffee. "Because I told them I was starting a new life. I can't go crawling back now." Mrs. Callahan didn't argue. She just nodded. "Fair enough. You got any skills?" "I can read and write. I can play piano. I worked in a dress shop for a while." "Piano's no use here," Mrs. Callahan said bluntly. "But if you can sew, that's something. Mrs. Harper down the street takes in mending. Might could use some help." It wasn't much, but it was something. "I'll talk to her," Elena said. Mrs. Callahan set a plate of eggs and toast in front of her. "Good. And in the meantime, you can help out here. I could use an extra pair of hands." Elena looked up, surprised. "You'd let me work for room and board? For now until you get on your feet." It was more kindness than Elena had expected, more than she felt she deserved. "Thank you." Mrs. Callahan shrugged. "Don't thank me yet. You might hate it." But Elena didn't think she would. The next few days passed in a blur of work. Elena helped Mrs. Callahan clean rooms, cook meals, and manage the boarders. It was hard, physical work, nothing like the quiet, careful tasks she'd done back in Boston. Her hands blistered, her back ached, but it kept her mind occupied, and that was enough. She also visited Mrs. Harper, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who ran a sewing business out of her front parlor. After inspecting Elena's stitching, she agreed to pay her a small wage for mending work. It wasn't much, but it was a start. One evening, as Elena was sweeping the front porch of the boarding house, she saw Wade Callahan walking down the street. He was leading a horse, his hat pulled low, his expression unreadable. He saw her and nodded. "Miss Cross." "Mr. Callahan." He tied the horse to the post and walked up onto the porch. "How you settling in?" "Well enough," Elena said. "Your sister's been kind. She's got a soft spot for strays." Elena wasn't sure if that was meant as an insult or just a statement of fact. She decided not to ask. "You find work?" Wade asked. "Some. Mending, mostly, and helping out here." He nodded. "Good." There was a pause. Not awkward exactly, but weighted, like he wanted to say something and didn't quite know how. Why did you help me? Elena asked suddenly. Wade looked at her, surprised. What? At the depot. You didn't know me. You didn't owe me anything, so why did you help me? He thought about it for a moment. Then he said, because someone needed to. It was the same answer he'd given before. But this time, Elena believed it a little more. Well, she said quietly, I'm grateful. Wade tipped his hat. No need for that. And then he walked inside. Elena stood there for a moment, broom in hand, staring after him. She didn't know what to make of Wade Callahan. He was quiet, gruff, hard to read, but he'd helped her when no one else had, and that meant something, more than she'd expected. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm. Elena worked, saved what little money she could, and slowly began to feel like maybe, just maybe, she could build something here. Not the life she'd planned, not the life Thomas had promised her, but something real. She still thought about him sometimes, wondered where he'd gone, what he was doing, but the anger had faded, replaced by something colder and harder. Resolve. She wasn't going to let him define her. One afternoon, Mrs. Callahan asked her to deliver a basket of laundry to a ranch just outside of town. Wade's place, she said casually. He pays good, and he don't complain. Elena's stomach did a small, unexpected flip. Wade lives on a ranch? Yep, about 2 miles out. You can take the wagon. Elena had never driven a wagon before, but she wasn't about to admit that. She nodded, loaded the basket, and climbed onto the seat. The road out of town was rough and dusty, but the day was clear, and Elena found herself almost enjoying the ride. The mountains rose in the distance, sharp and beautiful, and the air smelled like wildflowers and grass. When she reached the ranch, she was surprised by how well kept it was. The house was modest but solid, with a wide porch and a neat barn. Horses grazed in a nearby pasture, and chickens scratched in the dirt. Wade was fixing a fence near the barn. He looked up when she pulled the wagon to a stop. Miss Cross, he said, surprised. Your sister sent me with laundry, Elena said, climbing down. Hope that's all right. Yeah, fine. He set down his hammer and wiped his hands on his pants. You drive that wagon yourself? I did. He looked impressed. Most city women wouldn't. I'm not most city women. Wade almost smiled. Almost. He led her inside, and Elena was struck by how clean and organized everything was. No clutter, no mess, just simple, functional furniture and a stove that looked well used. You live here alone? She asked. Mostly. Got a hired hand who comes by a few times a week. Elena set the basket down on the table. It's a nice place. It works. She turned to leave, but Wade stopped her. You want some water before you head back? It's a hot day. Elena hesitated. Then she nodded. Sure. He poured her a glass from a pitcher, and she drank it slowly, looking around. There was something peaceful about this place. Something steady. You ever think about leaving? She asked. Wade frowned. Leaving where? Here. Ridgeway. He shook his head. No. This is home. Elena didn't know what that felt like anymore. Home had always been Boston, but Boston felt like a lifetime ago now. Must be nice, she said quietly, knowing where you belong. Wade looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, You'll figure it out. It wasn't a promise, wasn't even a comfort, really, but it was something. And for now, that was enough. The town of Ridgeway had a way of testing people. Elena learned that fast. It wasn't just the work, though that was hard enough. It was the isolation, the roughness, the constant feeling that you were one bad day away from losing everything. She saw it in the faces of the other women, the ones who'd come west with dreams and ended up washing clothes or serving drinks just to survive. But she also saw resilience, women who'd lost husbands, lost children, lost everything, and still got up in the morning and kept going. Elena wanted to be one of them. One evening, as she was finishing up in the kitchen, Mrs. Callahan sat down across from her with a cup of tea. You've been here almost a month, she said. Elena nodded. Has it been that long? You thinking about staying? Elena looked up, surprised. I don't know. I hadn't really thought about it. Well, you should. Because if you're going to stay, you need to start thinking long term. Mending work won't last forever, and neither will cleaning rooms. What do you suggest? Mrs. Callahan sipped her tea. You said you can play piano. Yes. There's a church social coming up in a few weeks. They're looking for someone to play. It don't pay much, but it's something, and people will remember you, might lead to other work. Elena considered it. All right, I'll do it. Mrs. Callahan smiled. Good, and who knows? Maybe you'll meet someone. Elena's stomach twisted. I'm not looking to meet anyone. Didn't say you were, but life's funny that way. Elena didn't argue. She just finished her tea and went upstairs. But that night, lying in bed, she thought about Wade Callahan. She didn't know why. He was just a man who'd helped her, nothing more. But something about him lingered, and she couldn't quite shake it. The church social arrived on a warm Saturday evening in late summer. The whole town seemed to turn out. Families, couples, single men looking for a drink and a dance. Elena sat at the old upright piano in the corner, her hands resting on the keys, trying to remember the last time she'd played for people. It had been in Boston, at a party her aunt had hosted. She'd worn a blue dress and felt elegant and important. Now she wore a simple cotton dress she'd mended herself, and her hands were calloused from work. But when she started playing, it all came back. The music flowed out of her, easy and familiar. People stopped talking to listen. A few couples started dancing, and for the first time in weeks, Elena felt like herself again. After a while, she took a break and stepped outside for some air. Wade was leaning against the side of the building, smoking a cigarette. Didn't know you could play like that, he said. Elena smiled. There's a lot you don't know about me. Fair enough. They stood there in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Wade said, You're staying, aren't you? Elena looked at him, surprised. What makes you say that? Because you don't look like you're running anymore. She thought about that. He was right. Somewhere along the way, she'd stopped thinking about Thomas, stopped thinking about Boston. She'd started thinking about tomorrow instead. Yeah, she said quietly. I think I am. Wade nodded. Good. And for the first time since she'd stepped off that stagecoach, Elena believed it too. The weeks after the church social changed something in Elena, though she couldn't say exactly what. Maybe it was the way people had looked at her when she played, like she was more than just the woman who'd been left at the depot. Maybe it was the small pile of coins Mrs. Harper had pressed into her hand after 3 weeks of steady mending work. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe she'd just stopped waiting for her old life to come find her. She woke up one morning in early September to the sound of rain hammering the roof. Mrs. Callahan was already downstairs, cursing at the stove, which had a habit of smoking when the weather turned damp. Fire won't catch, she said when Elena came into the kitchen. Wade's supposed to come by and fix the damper, but I don't know if he'll make it in this mess. Elena poured herself coffee and looked out the window. The street had turned to mud, and the few people who were out moved quickly, heads down against the rain. I can manage breakfast, Elena offered, if you want to get the laundry started before it gets worse. Mrs. Callahan gave her a look, half grateful, half appraising. You sure? I've been watching you long enough. I think I can fry eggs without burning the place down. All right then. Mrs. Callahan handed over the spatula like it was a badge of honor. Don't let Miller complain. He always complains. Miller was one of the long-term boarders, a rail-thin man in his 50s who worked at the assay office and had opinions about everything. Elena had learned to tune him out. She cracked eggs into the pan and tried not to think about the fact that 2 months ago she'd never cooked a meal in her life. Back in Boston, there had been servants for that. Her mother would have fainted if she'd seen Elena now, hair tied back with a frayed ribbon, sleeves rolled up, standing over a hot stove in a boarding house kitchen. The thought didn't sting the way it used to. Miller came down first, sniffing the air suspiciously. Smells different. I'm cooking today, Elena said without turning around. Where's Mrs. Callahan? Busy, he grunted and sat down. Elena slid a plate in front of him. Eggs, toast, a slice of ham. He poked at it with his fork, then took a bite. She waited. It's fine, he said finally. Elena smiled to herself. From Miller, that was practically a compliment. The door opened and Wade walked in, soaked through. Water dripped from the brim of his hat onto the floor. He took it off and shook it, spraying more water across the entryway. "You're making a mess," Elena said. Wade glanced at her, then at the puddle forming around his boots. "Didn't know you were the housekeeper now." "Someone has to keep this place from falling apart." He almost smiled. Almost. "Where's my sister?" "Out back, fighting with the laundry." Wade nodded and headed toward the back door, but Mrs. Callahan came in before he got there, carrying a basket of wet linens. She looked at him, then at the puddle. "You're dripping all over my floor. I'm here to fix your stove." "Good, because it's useless." She shoved the basket at Elena. "Hang these up in the parlor. We'll have to dry them inside today." Elena took the basket and carried it into the front room, where a line had been strung across the ceiling for exactly this purpose. She started hanging shirts and sheets, listening to the muffled conversation in the kitchen. Wade's voice, low and steady. Mrs. Callahan's sharper, more insistent. Then the clang of metal as Wade got to work on the stove. By the time Elena finished hanging the laundry, Wade had the stove working again. He was washing his hands in the basin when she came back in. "You staying for breakfast?" Mrs. Callahan asked him. "If there's enough." "There's always enough." She looked at Elena. "Make him a plate." Elena didn't argue. She dished out eggs and ham, added an extra slice of toast, and set it in front of Wade. He looked at it, then at her. "You cook this?" "Is that a problem?" "No, just didn't know you could." "I'm learning." Wade took a bite, chewed slowly, then nodded. "It's good." It was a small thing, but Elena felt a flicker of pride anyway. Mrs. Callahan sat down with her own plate and looked between the two of them. "Elena's getting baptized by fire here. Started out she couldn't boil water. Now she's running half the kitchen." "That right?" Wade said. "It's an exaggeration," Elena said quickly. "It's not," Mrs. Callahan said. "You've been a help. More than I expected." Elena didn't know what to say to that, so she just focused on her coffee. Wade finished his breakfast and stood. "I should get back. Got cattle to check before this weather gets worse." "You riding out in this?" Mrs. Callahan asked. "Have to. Can't leave them out there without knowing they're all right." Elena frowned. "Isn't that dangerous? The roads will be a mess." Wade looked at her like she'd said something funny. "City girl worried about a little mud." "I'm worried about you breaking your neck because you're too stubborn to wait an hour." The kitchen went quiet. Mrs. Callahan raised her eyebrows. Wade stared at Elena for a long moment, and she felt her face flush. She hadn't meant to say it like that, hadn't meant to sound like she cared, but apparently she did. Wade's expression softened just slightly. "I'll be careful." "See that you are," Mrs. Callahan said, breaking the tension. "I don't want to have to come drag you out of a ditch." Wade pulled his hat back on and headed for the door. But before he left, he glanced back at Elena. "Thanks for the breakfast," he said. And then he was gone. Mrs. Callahan waited until the door closed before she spoke. "You're getting attached." Elena's stomach dropped. "What?" To Wade, "You're getting attached." "I'm not." "Don't lie to me, girl. I've got eyes." Elena set down her cup, her hand shaking slightly. "It's not like that." "Isn't it? He helped me when I needed it, that's all." Mrs. Callahan leaned back in her chair, studying her. "Wade's a good man, but he's not an easy one, and he's got his own ghosts." Elena wanted to ask what that meant, but she didn't. It wasn't her business. Wade wasn't her business, except that every time he walked into a room, she noticed. And that scared her more than she wanted to admit. The rain didn't let up for 3 days. The streets turned into rivers of mud, and half the town shut down. Elena spent most of her time indoors, helping Mrs. Callahan with the endless cycle of cooking and cleaning and managing the boarders, who got restless and cranky when they couldn't work. On the third evening, Wade came by again. This time, he wasn't alone. He brought a woman with him, tall, maybe 30, with dark hair braided down her back and a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. She wore men's trousers and a heavy coat, and she moved with the kind of confidence Elena had only ever seen in men. "This is Sarah McKinnon," Wade said. "She runs a ranch about 10 miles north. Sarah, this is my sister, and this is Miss Cross." Sarah nodded at Mrs. Callahan, then turned her attention to Elena. "You're the one who got left at the depot." Elena stiffened. "News travels fast." It's a small town. Sarah's expression wasn't unkind, just blunt. You planning to stay? I am. Good. We need more women here who aren't afraid to work. Mrs. Callahan poured coffee for both of them, and they all sat down at the kitchen table. Sarah pulled out a folded piece of paper and spread it out. I'm putting together a cattle drive next month, she said, heading south to meet the railroad. I need an extra hand, and Wade said he'd come, but I also need someone to manage the supply wagon. That's usually a job for... Mrs. Callahan started, then stopped. You're asking Elena. Sarah looked at her. You ever driven a wagon long distance? No, Elena admitted. Can you handle a team? I've driven a wagon short distances. I'm a fast learner. Sarah studied her for a long moment. Then she said, It's 2 weeks on the trail. Hard work. You'll sleep on the ground, cook over a fire, and deal with whatever the weather throws at us. But it pays $20. $20? That was more than Elena made in 2 months of mending. I'll do it, she said, before she could think too hard about it. Mrs. Callahan looked like she wanted to argue, but Sarah just nodded. Good. We leave October 15th. Be ready. After Sarah left, Mrs. Callahan turned to Wade. You really think this is a good idea? She said she wanted to stay, Wade said. This is what staying looks like. Elena felt a surge of gratitude toward him, mixed with something else she couldn't quite name. The next few weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Sarah came by twice more to go over the details. What Elena would need to bring, how to manage the supplies, what to expect on the trail. It all felt overwhelming, but Elena forced herself to focus. This was an opportunity, a chance to prove she could do more than cook and mend. She also started spending more time at Wade's ranch. Mrs. Callahan sent her out there with laundry or messages, and Wade started teaching her things, how to hitch a team properly, how to read the weather, how to handle a rifle. You ever shot a gun before? He asked one afternoon. No. He handed her an old Spencer carbine. Time to learn. They set up a target, a tin can on a fence post, and Wade showed her how to load, aim, and fire. The first shot kicked harder than she expected, and she stumbled back. Wade caught her elbow. You all right? Fine. She reset her stance, aimed again, and fired. This time she was ready for the kick. The can didn't move. Try again, Wade said. She fired 3 more times. On the 4th shot, the can flew off the fence. Wade nodded. Not bad. Elena felt a grin spreading across her face. Not bad? I hit it. Eventually, she shoved him lightly, and he laughed, a real laugh, low and genuine. It was the first time she'd heard him laugh, and it did something strange to her chest. They walked back to the house together, the rifle slung over Elena's shoulder. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the grass. Why are you helping me? Elena asked. Wade glanced at her. What do you mean? All of this. Teaching me to shoot, convincing Sarah to hire me. You don't owe me anything. Wade was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Maybe I just don't like seeing people give up. I'm not giving up. I know. That's why I'm helping. They reached the house, and Elena handed him back the rifle. Their hands brushed, and she felt a jolt of something she didn't want to name. Thank you, she said quietly. Wade met her eyes. You're going to do fine out there. She wanted to believe him. The night before the cattle drive, Mrs. Callahan threw together a small dinner. Nothing fancy, just stew and bread. Wade came by, and so did Sarah. They sat around the kitchen table talking about the route, the weather, the cattle. Elena mostly listened. She was nervous, though she tried not to show it. 2 weeks on the trail, 2 weeks sleeping on the ground, surrounded by people she barely knew. Part of her wanted to back out, but a bigger part of her refused to. After dinner, Wade walked her outside. The air was cool, the sky full of stars. You scared? He asked. Elena considered lying. Then she said, A little. That's normal. Is it? Yeah. First time's always the hardest. She looked up at him. What about you? You scared? Wade smiled faintly. Not of the trail. Then what? He didn't answer right away. Then he said, That you'll realize you don't want this life. That you'll leave. The words hung between them, heavy and honest. Elena felt her heartbeat pick up. I'm not leaving, she said. You say that now. I mean it. Wade looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen before, something vulnerable. "All right," he said finally. "I believe you." They stood there in the darkness, not speaking, just existing in the same space. And for the first time since she'd stepped off that stagecoach, Elena felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The cattle drive started at dawn. Elena met Sarah and Wade at the edge of town, where a dozen head of cattle were already gathered. The supply wagon was bigger than she'd expected, loaded with food, water, tools, and tarps. 2 mules stood hitched to the front, flicking their ears impatiently. "You ready?" Sarah asked. Elena climbed onto the wagon seat. "Ready?" Sarah nodded and signaled to Wade and the other 2 hands, a young man named Charlie and an older guy named Dutch. The cattle started moving, slow and stubborn, and the wagon lurched forward. The first day was rough. The wagon jolted over every rock and rut, and Elena's hands were raw from gripping the reins. By the time they stopped for the night, her back ached and her legs felt like jelly. Wade came over as she was setting up her bedroll. "How you holding up?" "I'm fine. You look like you got dragged behind the wagon." "Thanks for that," he smiled. "You did good today." Elena looked up at him, surprised. "Really?" "Yeah, kept up, didn't complain. That's more than most people manage on their first day." She felt a warmth spread through her chest. "Well, don't get used to it. I reserve the right to complain tomorrow." Wade laughed and walked off to check the cattle. Elena lay down on her bedroll and stared up at the stars. Her body hurt, but her mind felt clear. She was doing this. She was actually doing this. The next few days fell into a rhythm. Wake up before dawn, get the fire going, make coffee and breakfast. Pack up the wagon, keep pace with the cattle. Stop for lunch, keep moving, stop again at dusk. Cook dinner, clean up, collapse. It was exhausting. But it was also exhilarating. Elena learned how to read the land, how to spot water sources, how to keep the mules calm when the cattle got spooked. She learned that Sarah was tougher than anyone she'd ever met, that Charlie was 19 and trying to save up enough money to buy his own land, and that Dutch had been doing cattle drives since before Elena was born. And she learned that Wade was different out here, more relaxed, more himself. One night, after everyone else had gone to sleep, Elena sat by the fire trying to get warm. Wade came over and sat down next to her. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Too cold." He pulled a blanket out of his pack and draped it over her shoulders. She pulled it tight, grateful. "Thank you." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the crackle of the fire and the distant sounds of the cattle. "You miss Boston?" Wade asked. Elena thought about it. "Sometimes. I miss the quiet, the comfort, knowing what to expect. But I don't miss feeling like I was living someone else's life." Wade nodded. "I get that." "Do you ever think about leaving here?" Elena asked. "No, this is where I belong." "How do you know?" Wade looked at her, his expression serious. "Because I've tried being somewhere else, and it didn't fit." Elena wondered what that meant, but she didn't push. Wade wasn't the kind of person you could push. "I think I'm starting to understand that," she said quietly. Wade's gaze lingered on her for a moment. Then he stood. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow's a long day." "They're all long days." He smiled. "Yeah, but you're keeping up." After he left, Elena sat by the fire a little longer, the blanket still wrapped around her shoulders. She thought about Thomas, about the life she'd almost had, and she realized she didn't miss it, didn't miss him. What she'd wanted back then wasn't love. It was safety, security, a plan. But out here, with the stars overhead and the fire crackling beside her, she realized she didn't need a plan. She just needed to keep moving forward. On the 8th day, they hit trouble. A storm rolled in fast, dark clouds, thunder, rain that came down in sheets. The cattle panicked, scattering in every direction. Sarah shouted orders, and everyone scrambled to keep the herd together. Elena fought to control the wagon as the mules balked and pulled. The wheels slipped in the mud, and for a terrifying moment she thought the whole thing was going to tip over. Then Wade was there, grabbing the reins, helping her steady the team. "Pull left!" he shouted over the wind. She pulled, and the wagon righted itself. Wade jumped up onto the seat beside her, taking control of one side while she handled the other. Together, they guided the wagon to higher ground, away from the worst of the mud. By the time the storm passed, they were both soaked through and shaking. Wade climbed down and checked the wheels, then came back around to her side. "You all right?" he asked. Elena nodded, though her hands were still trembling. "That was... yeah." They stood there in the rain, looking at each other. Elena felt something shift between them, something unspoken but undeniable. "Thank you," she said. Wade reached up and brushed a strand of wet hair out of her face. His hand lingered for a moment, and Elena's breath caught. Then he dropped his hand and stepped back. "We should check the cattle." Elena nodded, not trusting herself to speak. That night, after they'd rounded up the scattered herd and made camp, Sarah pulled Elena aside. "You did good today," she said. "Most people would have lost that wagon." Wade helped. "Wade always helps, but you held it together." Sarah studied her. "You're tougher than you look." Elena wasn't sure if that was a compliment or just a statement of fact, but she took it either way. The last few days of the drive passed without incident. They reached the railroad depot on schedule, sold the cattle, and got paid. Sarah handed Elena $20 in cash, and Elena stared at it like it was gold. "You earned it," Sarah said. "And if you ever want to do this again, you let me know." Elena folded the money carefully and tucked it into her pocket. "I will." The ride back to Ridgeway was quieter. Everyone was tired, worn down by 2 weeks of hard travel. But there was also a sense of accomplishment. They'd done what they set out to do. Wade rode beside the wagon for most of the journey. He didn't talk much, but Elena was starting to realize that was just who he was. He didn't waste words. When they finally reached town, it was late afternoon. Mrs. Callahan was waiting on the porch of the boarding house, arms crossed, looking both relieved and irritated. "You're late," she said. "We hit weather," Wade said. "Of course you did." She looked at Elena. "You look like hell." "Thank you," Elena said dryly. Mrs. Callahan smiled. "Come on, I'll heat up some water for a bath." Elena climbed down from the wagon, every muscle in her body protesting. She was filthy, exhausted, and sore. But she'd done it. She'd survived 2 weeks on the trail, and she'd earned $20. More than that, she'd proven something to herself. As she walked toward the house, Wade called out, "Miss Cross?" She turned. "You did good," he said. Elena smiled. "So did you." That night, after her bath, after dinner, after everyone else had gone to bed, Elena sat in her room and counted her money. $20. It wasn't a fortune, but it was hers. She thought about what Sarah had said. "You're tougher than you look." Maybe she was. And maybe that was enough. October turned into November, and the town started preparing for winter. Elena watched the mountains grow white at their peaks, watched the air turn sharp and cold in the mornings. She'd heard stories about Montana winters, about snow that piled up to the windowsills and temperatures that could kill a person in minutes if they got caught outside unprepared. Part of her was scared, but a bigger part of her was curious. She had $43 saved now, 20 from the cattle drive, the rest from mending work and helping Mrs. Callahan. It wasn't enough to do anything big with, but it felt like a cushion, like security, like maybe she could actually build something here. Wade came by the boarding house less often now that the weather had turned. He had his own place to winterize, his own stock to look after. But when he did come, Elena noticed him more. Noticed the way he moved, deliberate and unhurried. Noticed the way he listened when people talked, like he was actually hearing them instead of just waiting for his turn to speak. She tried not to think about the way he'd brushed her hair back during the storm. Tried not to think about the warmth in his voice when he'd told her she'd done good. But she thought about it anyway. One afternoon in mid-November, Mrs. Callahan sent her to the general store for flour and sugar. The store was crowded, everyone stocking up before the first real snow hit. Elena waited her turn, watching the storekeeper weigh out goods and take payment. That's when she heard the voice. "Elena!" She turned and her stomach dropped. Thomas Gentry stood 3 feet away, holding a bag of coffee beans. He looked thinner than she remembered, his face weathered in a way it hadn't been before. But it was definitely him. Elena's first instinct was to run. Her second was to slap him. She did neither. She just stared. "I thought that was you," Thomas said. He tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I wasn't sure." "What are you doing here?" Elena's voice came out flat, cold. "I live here. Or I did. I've been..." He stopped, like he wasn't sure how to finish. I've been in Butte for a while, just got back. Good for you. Thomas flinched. Look, I know you're angry. Angry? Elena's voice rose, and a few people turned to look. She didn't care. You left me at that depot. You promised me a life, and you just disappeared. I know I did, and I'm sorry. Sorry! Elena laughed, bitter and sharp. That's all you've got? Thomas glanced around, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. Can we talk? Somewhere private? No. Elena, please. No. She turned back to the counter, hands shaking. I don't want to hear it. The storekeeper handed her the flour and sugar, and Elena paid without looking at Thomas. She walked out of the store, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She made it halfway down the street before Thomas caught up with her. Elena, wait. She spun around. What do you want from me? Just let me explain. There's nothing to explain. You lied to me. You made promises you had no intention of keeping, and then you left me stranded in a place I didn't know with no money and no way home. Thomas ran a hand through his hair. He looked tired. I got scared, all right? I got scared and I panicked. I wasn't ready for all of it, the responsibility, the commitment. Then why did you ask me to come? I don't know. His voice cracked. I thought I wanted it. I thought I could do it. But when it came down to it, I couldn't. Elena stared at him, and something inside her shifted. She'd spent weeks being angry, being hurt. But looking at him now, she didn't feel either of those things. She just felt tired. You should have told me, she said quietly. You should have been honest. I know, you're right. I was a coward. Yeah, you were. They stood there in the street, and Elena realized she had nothing else to say to him. No more anger to throw, no more hurt to unpack. He was just a man who'd made a mistake. A selfish, terrible mistake, but he wasn't worth carrying around anymore. I'm doing fine, by the way, she said. In case you were wondering. Thomas looked at her, surprised. You are? Yeah, I got a job, made friends. I'm building a life here. She adjusted the flour sack in her arms. Without you. Thomas's face fell. Elena, I was hoping maybe we could start over. Try again. Elena felt something cold settle in her chest. You're not serious. I am. I've changed. I've been thinking about you, about us. There is no us. But there could be. If you just give me a chance, no. Elena's voice was firm, final. I gave you a chance, and you threw it away. I'm not doing that again. Thomas reached for her arm, but she stepped back. Elena, please, don't touch me. He dropped his hand. I made a mistake. People make mistakes. Yeah, and people live with the consequences. She turned to walk away, then stopped. You know what the worst part is? I actually felt sorry for you just now. I thought maybe you'd learned something, grown up a little, but you haven't. You're still the same selfish person you were when you left me at that depot. That's not fair. Life's not fair, Thomas. I learned that the hard way. Maybe you should too. She walked away, and this time he didn't follow. By the time Elena got back to the boarding house, her hands had stopped shaking. Mrs. Callahan took one look at her face and poured her a cup of tea. What happened? I ran into Thomas. Mrs. Callahan's expression darkened. That bastard's back in town? Apparently. Elena sat down at the table, wrapping her hands around the cup. He tried to apologize, said he wanted to start over. What did you tell him? I told him no. Mrs. Callahan nodded, satisfied. Good. Elena sipped her tea, letting the warmth settle into her bones. I thought I'd feel something. Anger, hurt, I don't know. But I just felt nothing. That's how you know you're over it. Am I? Mrs. Callahan leaned back in her chair. You tell me. If he'd asked you to leave with him, would you have gone? Elena didn't even have to think about it. No. Then you're over it. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Thomas, about the life she'd almost had with him. It felt like looking at someone else's story now, like it had happened to a different person. She thought about Wade, too, about the way he'd looked at her during the storm, the way he'd said she did good, about the quiet steadiness of him, the way he showed up without needing to be asked. She didn't know what that meant, didn't know if it meant anything at all. But she knew she wasn't the same person who'd stepped off that stagecoach 3 months ago. The next morning, Wade came by to drop off firewood. Elena was out front sweeping the porch when he pulled up in his wagon. "Morning," he said. "Morning." He started unloading logs, stacking them neatly against the side of the house. Elena watched him work, trying to figure out how to say what she needed to say. "I saw Thomas yesterday," she said finally. Wade's hand stilled for just a moment. Then he picked up another log. "Yeah? He's back in town. I heard. He tried to apologize, said he wanted to try again." Wade set down the log and turned to face her. His expression was carefully neutral. "What did you say?" "I told him no." Something shifted in Wade's face. Relief, maybe, or satisfaction, but he just nodded. "Good." "He hurt me," Elena said quietly, "but I'm not angry anymore. I don't care." Wade studied her for a long moment. Then he said, "That's how you know you've moved on." "Your sister said the same thing. She's usually right." Elena smiled despite herself. "Don't tell her that. She's insufferable enough as it is." Wade almost laughed. Then he went back to stacking wood. Elena stood there, watching him, and felt something settle into place inside her. She didn't need Thomas, didn't need his apologies or his second chances. She needed this town, this life, these people. And maybe, just maybe, she needed Wade. The first snow came 2 weeks later. Elena woke up to a world turned white, silent, and strange. She'd seen snow before back in Boston, but not like this. This was different, heavier, deeper. Mrs. Callahan was already up, stoking the fire. "Welcome to winter," she said. "Hope you're ready." Elena looked out the window at the drifts piling up against the fence. "I don't think I am." "Nobody ever is. But you'll manage." The snow didn't stop for 3 days. When it finally cleared, the town was buried. Men spent hours digging out doorways and paths. Supplies ran low. The cold was brutal, sharp enough to hurt, but people helped each other. Neighbors shared firewood, shared food. Elena and Mrs. Callahan cooked extra stew and brought it to families who were struggling. It was hard work, exhausting work, but it felt good. Wade came by on the 4th day, riding through snow that came up to his horse's knees. He looked half frozen, his face red from the wind. "You all right?" Mrs. Callahan asked. "Fine. Just checking on you." "We're managing. You?" "Same." Elena brought him coffee, and he wrapped his hands around the cup like it was the most valuable thing he'd ever held. "You shouldn't have come out in this," she said. "Had to make sure you were all right." "We're fine." Wade looked at her, his eyes serious. "I know, but I had to see for myself." Elena felt warmth spread through her chest, and it had nothing to do with the fire. They stood there in the kitchen, snow melting off Wade's boots, steam rising from his coffee. And Elena realized something she'd been avoiding for weeks. She was falling for him. Not the way she'd thought she loved Thomas. That had been desperation dressed up as romance. This was different, quieter, steadier, terrifying. Wade finished his coffee and set the cup down. "I should get back before the light fades." "Be careful," Elena said. He tipped his hat. "Always am." After he left, Mrs. Callahan gave her a look. "You're going to have to tell him eventually." Elena's face flushed. "Tell him what?" "Don't play dumb. It doesn't suit you." "I don't know what you're talking about," Mrs. Callahan sighed. "You're as stubborn as he is. That's going to be a problem." "There's nothing to be stubborn about, if you say so." But that night, lying in bed, Elena couldn't stop thinking about Wade, about the way he'd ridden through a blizzard just to check on them, about the way he looked at her sometimes, like she was something worth protecting. She didn't know what to do with that, didn't know if she was ready for it, but she knew she wanted to be. December came, and with it, plans for a town celebration. Nothing fancy, just a gathering at the community hall, some music, some food, a chance to break up the monotony of winter. Mrs. Callahan volunteered Elena to play piano. Elena tried to refuse, but Mrs. Callahan wouldn't hear it. "You're good at it, and people need something to look forward to." So Elena practiced. She hadn't played much since the church social, and her fingers felt stiff at first. But the muscle memory came back, and soon she was playing pieces she hadn't thought about in months. Wade came by one afternoon while she was practicing. He stood in the doorway, listening. Didn't know you could play like that, he said when she finished. Elena turned, startled. How long have you been standing there? Long enough. It's not that impressive. It is to me. Elena felt her face heat. Well, thank you. Wade walked over and sat down on the bench beside her. It was a small bench, and his shoulder brushed against hers. Elena's breath caught. You nervous? He asked. About the celebration? A little. You'll be fine. You always are. Elena looked at him. You have a lot of faith in me. Yeah, I do. There was something in his voice, something warm and certain, that made Elena's heart race. She wanted to say something, wanted to tell him how she felt, but the words stuck in her throat. Wade stood. I should let you practice. Wait. Elena's voice came out before she could stop it. Wade turned back. Yeah? She didn't know what she was going to say, didn't have the words ready, but she couldn't let him leave. Not yet. Will you be there? She asked. At the celebration? Wade's expression softened. Yeah, I'll be there. Good. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he left. Elena sat at the piano, her hands shaking, her heart pounding. She didn't know what she was doing, didn't know if Wade felt the same way, but she knew she couldn't keep pretending she didn't care. The night of the celebration arrived cold and clear. The community hall was packed. Families, couples, single folks looking for a good time. Someone had strung up garlands, and the smell of pine mixed with roasted meat and fresh bread. Elena sat at the piano trying to calm her nerves. She wore the best dress she owned, a deep green one she'd brought from Boston and never had occasion to wear. Mrs. Callahan had helped her fix her hair, twisting it up in a way that felt too fancy for Ridgeway, but also felt right. You look beautiful, Mrs. Callahan had said. Elena had brushed off the compliment, but now, sitting at the piano, she hoped it was true. The evening started with dinner. Elena played soft background music while people ate and talked. Then, as the plates were cleared and the dancing started, she played louder, faster. People moved to the music, laughing and spinning. She saw Wade across the room, talking to Sarah McKinnon. He looked different tonight, cleaner, his hair combed back, wearing a shirt that wasn't covered in dust. He looked good. Elena tried not to stare, tried to focus on the music. But then Wade was walking toward her, and her fingers stumbled over the keys. He stopped in front of the piano. You got time for a break? Elena's mouth went dry. I guess so. She stood and Wade offered his arm. She took it, feeling the warmth of him through his sleeve. They walked outside, away from the noise and the heat. The air was freezing, but it felt good after the stuffiness of the hall. Stars filled the sky, bright and endless. You're really good, Wade said. At the piano. Thank you. I mean it. You could have done that professionally, back east. Elena shook her head. Maybe, but I didn't want to. What did you want? She thought about it. I don't know. I thought I wanted what Thomas was offering. A home, a family, security. But I don't think that's what I wanted at all. Then what? Elena looked up at the stars. I think I just wanted to feel like I mattered. Like I was more than just someone's daughter or someone's wife, like I was my own person. Wade was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You are. Elena turned to him. What? Your own person. You are. I've watched you these past few months, watched you work, watched you learn, watched you push through things most people would have given up on. You're not defined by Thomas or anyone else. You're just you. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. Wade, I'm not good with words, he said, cutting her off. I'm not the kind of guy who makes speeches or writes letters. But I need you to know something. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought he might hear it. Wade took a breath. I care about you. More than I probably should. And I don't know if you feel the same way, and that's fine if you don't. But I couldn't keep pretending I didn't. Elena stared at him, her mind racing. This was it. This was the moment she'd been too scared to hope for. I care about you too, she said, her voice shaking. Wade's expression shifted. Surprise, then relief, then something deeper. Yeah? Yeah. He stepped closer, and Elena's breath hitched. He reached up, cupping her face with one rough hand, and she leaned into the touch. "Can I kiss you?" he asked. Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. Wade leaned in, and his lips met hers, gentle at first, then deeper. Elena's hands found his shoulders, gripping tight, and she kissed him back with everything she had. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathing hard. "That was—" Elena started. "Yeah," Wade said. They stood there, foreheads touching, and Elena felt something shift inside her. Something that had been locked up tight for months finally breaking free. She wasn't scared anymore. She didn't need to be. Inside the hall, the music had started again. Someone was calling for Elena to come back and play. But she didn't move. "We should go back in," Wade said, though he didn't sound like he wanted to. "Probably." But neither of them moved. Finally, Wade stepped back, though he kept hold of her hand. "Come on," before they send a search party. Elena laughed, and they walked back inside together. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Elena played piano, danced with Wade when someone else took over the keys, and felt lighter than she had in years. Thomas was there, she noticed, watching from the corner. But she didn't care. Let him watch. Let him see what he'd lost. When the celebration finally ended and people started heading home, Wade walked her back to the boarding house. The streets were quiet, the snow crunching under their boots. "Thank you," Elena said when they reached the porch. "For tonight." "Thank you," Wade said, "for giving me a chance." Elena smiled. "I think we're giving each other a chance." Wade kissed her again, soft and slow, and Elena felt like she was floating. When he finally pulled away, he said, "I'll see you tomorrow." "You better." He tipped his hat and walked off into the night, and Elena stood on the porch, watching him go. Inside, Mrs. Callahan was waiting with a knowing smile. "Well?" she said. Elena couldn't stop grinning. "Well, what?" "Don't play coy with me. What happened?" "He kissed me." Mrs. Callahan laughed. "About time." Elena sat down at the table, still smiling. "I don't know what happens now." "Nobody ever does, but you'll figure it out." Elena thought about that. Thought about the life she was building, the choices she was making. Thought about Wade, and the way he looked at her like she was something precious. She didn't have all the answers, didn't know what the future looked like. But for the first time since she'd arrived in Ridgeway, she wasn't afraid of it. The morning after the celebration, Elena woke with her heart still racing. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the kiss over and over in her mind, the way Wade's hand had cupped her face, the way he'd looked at her like she was the only person in the world. She touched her lips, half convinced she'd dreamed the whole thing. But then she heard his voice downstairs. She scrambled out of bed, threw on her dress, and tried to fix her hair. It was hopeless, tangled from sleep and sticking up in odd directions. She gave up and went downstairs anyway. Wade was sitting at the kitchen table with Mrs. Callahan drinking coffee. He looked up when Elena walked in, and something warm passed between them. "Morning," he said. "Morning." Elena's voice came out too breathless. She cleared her throat. "What are you doing here so early?" "Brought eggs," Wade said, nodding toward a basket on the counter. "Figured you could use them." Mrs. Callahan snorted. "He's never brought eggs before in his life." Wade's ears turned red. "Well, I brought them today." Elena bit back a smile and poured herself coffee. She sat down across from Wade, their knees almost touching under the table. "Sleep well?" he asked. "Not really." "Me neither." Mrs. Callahan looked between them and stood up. "I'm going to check the laundry. You two try not to be too obvious." After she left, Wade reached across the table and took Elena's hand. His palm was rough, calloused from years of ranch work, but his touch was gentle. "I meant what I said last night," he said quietly. "I know. And I want to do this right, not rush it, not mess it up." Elena squeezed his hand. "I don't know what right looks like." "Me neither, but I figure we can work it out as we go." It should have scared her, the uncertainty of it, the risk. But it didn't. With Thomas, everything had been planned out, promised, guaranteed, and it had all fallen apart. With Wade, there were no guarantees, just honesty and effort. And somehow, that felt safer. "All right," Elena said. "We'll figure it out." Wade smiled, and it transformed his whole face. Elena realized she'd never seen him really smile before. Not like this. It made her want to make him smile more often. They sat there drinking coffee, not saying much, just being together. And it felt easy in a way Elena hadn't expected. The next few weeks settled into a new rhythm. Wade came by more often, always with some excuse. Firewood, supplies, checking on the roof. Elena saw through it, and so did Mrs. Callahan, but neither of them said anything. Sometimes Wade took Elena out to his ranch. She'd help with small tasks, feeding chickens, mending tack, organizing the barn. It wasn't romantic, exactly, but there was something intimate about working side by side, about learning the details of his life. One afternoon in late December, Wade showed her something she hadn't seen before. They walked past the main house to a smaller structure she'd assumed was a storage shed. "What's this?" Elena asked. Wade pushed open the door. Inside was a half-finished house. Framed walls, a stone fireplace, windows waiting to be installed. It smelled like fresh-cut lumber and possibility. Elena stepped inside, looking around. "You're building this?" "Yeah, started it last spring. Haven't had much time to work on it lately. It's beautiful." She ran her hand along one of the beams. "What's it for?" Wade was quiet for a moment, then he said, "I was building it for myself. A better house than the one I'm in now. But lately I've been thinking..." He stopped, like he wasn't sure he should continue. "Thinking what?" He looked at her and there was something vulnerable in his expression. "Thinking maybe it could be for someone else too, someday." Elena's heart stuttered. She understood what he was saying, what he was offering, not a proposal, not yet, but a possibility, a future. "It's not finished," Wade said quickly, "and I don't want you to feel pressured or give." Elena kissed him, cut him off mid-sentence, standing on her toes to reach his mouth. Wade made a surprised sound, then wrapped his arms around her waist and lifted her off the ground. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Elena said, "I like it, the house. I like it a lot." Wade set her down but didn't let go. "Yeah?" "Yeah." They stood there in the unfinished house, and Elena felt something shift. This was real. This was happening, and she wanted it more than she'd wanted anything in her life. But of course, nothing that good could last without a fight. Elena started noticing Thomas around town more often. He'd show up at the general store when she was shopping, at the post office when she was mailing letters. At first she thought it was coincidence. Then she realized it wasn't. He was following her. It came to a head one afternoon in early January. Elena was walking back from Mrs. Harper's, carrying a bundle of finished mending, when Thomas stepped out from an alley. "We need to talk," he said. Elena's stomach clenched. "No, we don't." "Yes, we do." Thomas moved to block her path. "You've been avoiding me." "Because I don't want to talk to you." "I see you with him, with Wade Callahan." Elena's jaw tightened. "That's none of your business." "It is when you're making a mistake. The only mistake I made was trusting you." Thomas's face darkened. "He's not right for you. He's a rancher, a nobody. You came from a good family, Elena. You deserve better than..." "Stop." Elena's voice was cold and sharp. "You don't get to tell me what I deserve. You lost that right when you left me stranded. I'm trying to protect you. I don't need your protection. I don't need anything from you." Thomas grabbed her arm, and Elena's heart jumped into her throat. "Let go of me. Just listen." "She said let go!" Wade's voice cut through the air like a knife. He stood at the end of the street, his expression dark and dangerous. Elena had never seen him look like that. Thomas dropped her arm. "This doesn't concern you, Callahan." "It does when you put your hands on her." Thomas stepped back, but his face was twisted with anger. "You think you're better than me? You think you can just swoop in and..." "I think you need to leave," Wade said, his voice low and controlled. "Now." For a moment, Elena thought Thomas might actually throw a punch. But then he looked at Wade, really looked at him, and seemed to think better of it. "This isn't over," Thomas said to Elena. "Yes, it is." Thomas glared at both of them, then turned and walked away. Wade came over to Elena, his expression softening. "You all right?" Elena nodded, though her hands were shaking. "I'm fine, thank you." "He hurt you?" "No, just grab my arm. I'm fine." Wade looked like he wanted to go after Thomas anyway, but Elena put a hand on his chest. Don't. He's not worth it. Wade took a deep breath, visibly calming himself. Then he picked up the bundle of mending Elena had dropped. Come on, I'll walk you back. They walked in silence for a while. Then Elena said, He called you a nobody. Wade shrugged. I've been called worse. It bothered me, what he said. Why? It's true. I'm just a rancher. I don't have money or a fancy name or... Elena stopped walking. You're not a nobody. You're the person who helped me when I had nothing. You're the person who taught me how to survive here. You're the person who sees me, really sees me, not just what I used to be or what I'm supposed to be. Her voice cracked. You're everything he's not. Wade stared at her, and for a moment, Elena thought he might cry, but he just pulled her into his arms and held her tight. I love you, he said against her hair. I know it's too soon, and I know we're still figuring this out, but I love you. Elena's breath caught. She pulled back just enough to look at him. I love you too. Wade kissed her, right there in the middle of the street, and Elena didn't care who saw. That night, Elena sat with Mrs. Callahan in the kitchen, telling her everything that had happened. Thomas isn't going to let this go, Mrs. Callahan said. Men like him never do. What should I do? Tell Wade. Tell the sheriff if you have to, but don't handle it alone. Elena nodded. I won't. But she couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. The next morning, Wade came by with a proposition. Move in with me, he said. Elena blinked. What? To the ranch. Not in that way. I mean, there's the main house and the unfinished one. You could stay in the main house. I'd stay in the barn if I had to. I don't like the idea of you being in town where Thomas can corner you. Elena looked at Mrs. Callahan, who was trying very hard to pretend she wasn't listening. I can't just leave, Elena said. Mrs. Callahan needs help here. Actually, Mrs. Callahan said, I've been thinking about hiring someone. Business has been good. I can afford it now. Elena frowned. You're trying to get rid of me. I'm trying to let you live your life. There's a difference. Elena looked between them. You two planned this. We talked, Wade admitted, but the decision is yours. Elena thought about it. The ranch was safer, more isolated. And the idea of being closer to Wade, of waking up and seeing the mountains every morning, of building something together, it appealed to her more than she wanted to admit. What about propriety? She asked. People will talk. People always talk, Mrs. Callahan said. And honestly, half the women in this town would kill to have a man like Wade looking out for them. Wade's ears turned red again. I'm not asking you to marry me. Not yet. I'm just asking you to be safe. Not yet? Elena's heart skipped. Wade met her eyes. Eventually, if you want, when you're ready. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. All right, I'll do it. Wade's face broke into a smile, and Mrs. Callahan clapped her hands. Good. I'll help you pack. Moving to the ranch took less time than Elena expected. She didn't have much. A few dresses, some books, the money she'd saved. Wade loaded it all into his wagon, and they rode out together. The ranch looked different in winter, stark and beautiful, with snow covering everything. Wade showed her around the main house, simple but clean, with a good stove and sturdy furniture. You'll stay here, he said. I'll take the unfinished house. It's got a stove and a bed. That's all I need. Wade, that's ridiculous. It's freezing. You can't... I'll be fine. And this way nobody can say anything. Elena wanted to argue, but she could see he'd made up his mind. All right, but if you freeze to death, I'm going to be very upset. Wade smiled. Noted. That first night of the ranch was strange. Elena lay in Wade's bed, well, what was now her bed, staring at the ceiling. The house creaked in the wind, and she could hear cattle lowing in the distance. It was lonely, but it was also peaceful. In the morning, Wade knocked on the door early. You up? Elena opened the door, still in her nightgown with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. What time is it? Just after dawn. I made coffee. She followed him to the kitchen, where he had already started a fire in the stove. The warmth felt like heaven. How'd you sleep? He asked. Better than I expected. You? Like a rock. They drank coffee together as the sun came up, painting the mountains gold and pink. Elena thought about how different this was from the life she'd imagined with Thomas. That life had been about comfort and security and fitting into someone else's plan. This life was about building something from scratch, together, and she wouldn't trade it for anything. The weeks that followed were hard but good. Wade taught Elena how to manage the ranch, how to care for the animals, how to fix things when they broke, how to read the weather. She learned fast, surprising both of them. One afternoon, they were mending a fence when Wade said, "You ever think about going back to Boston?" Elena hammered in a nail before answering. "Sometimes. I think about my mother, my sisters. Wonder if they're all right. You could write them." "I could, but I don't know what I'd say." "You could tell them the truth, that you're happy." Elena looked at him. "Am I?" Wade stopped working. "Aren't you?" Elena thought about it, really thought about it. 6 months ago, she'd been miserable, lost and scared, and convinced her life was over. Now she was standing in the snow, her hands blistered from work, living in a place she'd never heard of with a man she'd met by accident. And she was happy. Genuinely, unexpectedly happy. "Yeah," she said. "I am." Wade smiled and went back to the fence, but Elena saw the relief in his expression. That night, she did write a letter. Not to her mother, not yet, but to her younger sister, Margot, who'd always understood her better than anyone. She kept it simple. Said she was in Montana, that she'd found work, that she was doing well. She didn't mention Thomas or Wade or any of the mess in between, just that she was building a life. She didn't know if Margot would write back, didn't know if her family would forgive her for leaving. But she mailed the letter anyway. February came, and with it, worse weather. Blizzards that lasted days. Temperatures so cold that water froze solid in minutes. Wade and Elena worked together to keep the animals alive, hauling feed through snowdrifts, breaking ice in the troughs, checking for frostbite. It was brutal, exhausting, and it brought them closer than anything else could have. One night, after a particularly bad storm, they sat by the fire in the main house. Wade had come in half frozen, and Elena had insisted he stay until he warmed up. "You're going to get sick if you keep sleeping in that unfinished house," she said. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're shivering." Wade looked at her, and there was something in his expression she couldn't quite read. "I can't stay here, Elena. Not like this. Not when I—" He stopped. "When you what?" "When I want to be with you, really be with you, and I can't do that unless we're married." Elena's heart pounded. "Then marry me." Wade stared at her. "What?" "You heard me. Marry me." "Elena, I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking. I'm telling you. Marry me, Wade. I love you. I want to build a life with you. I don't want to wait anymore." Wade looked stunned. Then he started laughing, a real, full laugh that filled the room. "You're proposing to me? Is that a problem?" "No, it's—" He pulled her close, kissing her hard. "Yes. Yes, I'll marry you." Elena laughed, tears streaming down her face. "Good." They were married a week later. It was a small ceremony, just Mrs. Callahan, Sarah McKinnon, and a handful of friends. No fancy dress, no big celebration. Just two people promising to love each other, to build a life together, to face whatever came next as a team. When the preacher asked if Wade took Elena as his wife, his voice was steady and sure. "I do." And when Elena said the same, she meant it with every fiber of her being. That night, they stayed in the main house together. No more pretending, no more distance. Just the two of them, finally together in every way. Elena lay in Wade's arms, listening to his heartbeat, and felt a peace she'd never known before. "I can't believe we did that," she said. Wade kissed the top of her head. "Having second thoughts?" "Not even a little." "Good, because you're stuck with me now." Elena smiled. "I can live with that." They fell asleep tangled together, and for the first time since she'd arrived in Montana, Elena felt like she was exactly where she belonged. But the next morning brought trouble. Elena was making breakfast when she heard shouting outside. She looked out the window and saw Thomas riding up to the house, his face red with anger. Wade was already outside, standing between Thomas and the house. Elena's stomach dropped. She threw on her coat and ran out. "You had no right," Thomas was shouting. "She was mine. You had no right to—" "She was never yours," Wade said, his voice cold. Thomas swung down from his horse. You stole her from me. I didn't steal anyone. She made her own choice. Thomas laughed bitterly. You really think she loves you? She's just desperate. She's using you because she had nowhere else to go. Elena stepped forward. That's not true. Thomas spun around. Elena, I love him, she said firmly. I married him because I love him, not because I was desperate, not because I had no other choice, because I wanted to. Thomas's face crumpled. You married him? Yesterday. He stared at her, and for a moment Elena saw real pain in his eyes, but then it hardened into anger. You'll regret this, he said. Both of you. Wade stepped forward. Get off my property. Now. Or what? Or I'll make you? For a tense moment, Elena thought Thomas might actually fight, but then he seemed to deflate. He looked at Elena one last time, his expression bitter and broken. I hope you're happy, he said. I am. Thomas climbed back on his horse and rode away. Elena watched him go, feeling nothing but relief. Wade put his arm around her. You all right? Yeah, I'm fine. But that night as they lay in bed, Elena said, Do you think he'll really let it go? Wade was quiet for a long moment. I don't know, but if he comes back, we'll deal with it, together. Elena nodded and curled closer to him. She believed him. They would deal with it. Whatever came next, they'd face it together, and that was enough. Spring came late that year. Elena had been watching for it since mid-March, scanning the horizon for signs of thaw, listening for the sound of ice breaking in the creek. But winter held on with a stubborn grip, refusing to let go until well into April. By then, she and Wade had been married 4 months. 4 months of learning how to live together, how to work together, how to fight and make up and keep going. It wasn't always easy. Wade could be maddeningly quiet when something bothered him, keeping it locked up until Elena had to pry it out of him. And Elena had a temper she hadn't known she possessed, flaring up when things went wrong, when the work got too hard, when she felt overwhelmed by everything she still didn't know. But they were learning, figuring it out one day at a time. The unfinished house was coming along. Wade worked on it whenever he had spare time, which wasn't often. But slowly the walls were going up, the roof was taking shape. Elena helped when she could, holding boards in place while Wade hammered, fetching tools, sweeping sawdust. One afternoon in late April, as they were working on framing the bedroom, Elena said, I got a letter from Margot. Wade looked up, surprised. Your sister? Yeah, it came this morning. What'd she say? Elena pulled the letter from her pocket. She'd already read it 3 times, but she unfolded it again. She said Mother was upset when I left. Really upset. But Margot said she's coming around. She asked where I was, what I was doing, if I was safe. What are you going to tell her? Elena folded the letter back up. The truth. That I'm married, that I'm building a life here, that I'm happy. Wade set down his hammer. Are you? Happy? Elena looked at him, at his weathered face, his rough hands, the sawdust in his hair. Yeah, I am. Even when things are hard, even when I'm tired and sore and covered in dirt, I'm happy. Wade smiled, and it still did something to her chest. Good. They went back to work, but Elena couldn't stop thinking about the letter, about her family back in Boston, about the life she'd left behind. Part of her missed it, the comfort, the familiarity, but she didn't regret leaving, not for a second. That night she wrote back to Margot, told her everything, about Thomas abandoning her, about Wade, about the ranch. She described the mountains, the work, the way the sky looked at sunset. She told Margot she was married, that she loved her husband, that she was building something real. She didn't know if her mother would ever forgive her, but she hoped Margot would understand. Thomas had been quiet since his confrontation at the ranch. For weeks, Elena kept expecting him to show up again, to cause more trouble. But he stayed away. People in town said he'd taken a job at one of the mines in Butte, that he was barely around anymore. Elena wanted to believe it was over, but something in her gut said it wasn't. The feeling proved right in early May. Elena was in town picking up supplies when she ran into Sarah McKinnon. Sarah looked tense, her jaw tight. You heard? Sarah asked. Heard what? About Thomas. He's been talking, spreading rumors. Elena's stomach sank. What kind of rumors? Saying you and Wade were together before you and Thomas split, that Wade stole you away, that you're... Sarah hesitated. That you're not a decent woman. Elena felt heat rush to her face. That's not true. None of it. I know that. But people love gossip, and some of them are listening. What do I do? Sarah shrugged. Ignore it, or confront him. Either way, it'll blow over eventually. It always does. But Elena couldn't just ignore it. The idea of people in town thinking she was unfaithful, that Wade had done something wrong, it made her furious. She found Thomas that evening at the saloon. He was sitting at a corner table, nursing a whiskey, looking like he hadn't slept in days. Elena walked right up to him. We need to talk. Thomas looked up, his eyes bleary. Elena. Outside, now. He followed her out into the street. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the buildings. I heard what you've been saying about me, Elena said. About Wade. Thomas had the decency to look ashamed. I didn't mean for it to spread like that. But you said it. I was angry. I still am. That doesn't give you the right to lie about us. Thomas ran a hand through his hair. It's not all lies. You moved on fast. Real fast. I moved on when you abandoned me. You don't get to be angry about that. I know. His voice cracked. I know I screwed up. I know I hurt you. But seeing you with him, it kills me, Elena. It kills me knowing I had you, and I threw it away. Elena felt a pang of something, not sympathy, exactly, but recognition. She understood regret. Understood the weight of knowing you'd made the wrong choice. Then you should have thought about that before you left me at that depot, she said quietly. But you didn't. You chose to run, and I chose to stay. And I built a life without you. That's not my fault. That's yours. Thomas's face crumpled. I'm sorry. I know you are. But sorry doesn't fix what you broke. She turned to leave, but Thomas grabbed her wrist. Not hard, just desperate. Is there any chance at all, that you could forgive me? That we could start over? Elena pulled her hand free. No, there isn't. I love Wade. I married him. And even if I didn't, even if I was alone, I still wouldn't go back to you, because I don't trust you, and I don't think I ever could. Thomas stared at her, and she saw the moment it finally hit him, that it was really over, that there was no going back. I hope you're happy with him, he said, and for the first time he sounded like he meant it. I am. Good, you deserve to be. Elena nodded and walked away, and this time she didn't look back. When she got home, Wade was waiting on the porch. He stood when he saw her, his expression worried. You all right? Elena climbed the steps and wrapped her arms around him. I'm fine. I talked to Thomas, told him to stop spreading lies. What'd he say? He apologized. I think he finally understands it's over. Wade held her tight. Good, because I was about 2 seconds away from going into town and handling it myself. Elena laughed despite herself. I can handle Thomas. I know you can. Doesn't mean I don't want to protect you. I know. She pulled back to look at him. But I need you to trust that I can take care of myself, at least some of the time. Wade nodded. I do trust you. Sometimes I forget you're not that scared woman I met at the depot anymore. I'm not. You helped me see that. You did it yourself. Elena smiled. We helped each other. They went inside, and Wade made dinner while Elena worked on mending. It was a quiet evening, peaceful, and Elena realized that this was what she loved most about her life now. Not the grand moments, not the dramatic declarations, just the quiet, steady rhythm of building something together. Summer came on fast and hot. The ranch exploded with life, grass growing tall, wildflowers covering the hills, the creek running clear and cold. Elena spent long days working in the garden she'd started, planting vegetables and herbs. Wade finished the new house, and they moved in together, leaving the old house for hired hands when they needed them. The new house was beautiful, simple but solid, with wide windows that looked out over the mountains. Elena stood in the bedroom one morning, watching the sun rise, and felt a contentment she'd never known before. Wade came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. What are you thinking about? How different everything is. How different I am. You miss Boston? Elena thought about it. I miss some things, my sisters, the ocean, but I don't miss who I was there. That girl was so scared of everything, scared of making the wrong choice, scared of disappointing people, scared of being alone. And now? Now I'm still scared sometimes, but I'm also strong, stronger than I ever thought I could be. She turned in his arms. You helped me find that. Wade shook his head. It was always there. You just needed a reason to use it. That afternoon, Sarah McKinnon came by with news. She was planning another cattle drive in the fall, and she wanted Elena and Wade both. Same setup as last time, Sarah said, but bigger, more cattle, longer route, better pay. Elena looked at Wade. What do you think? I think we could use the money, and you did good last time. We both did. Sarah smiled. So that's a yes? Elena nodded. That's a yes. After Sarah left, Wade said, You sure you want to do this? It's going to be hard. Harder than last time. I know, but I want to. I want to prove I can do it again. Wade pulled her close. You don't have to prove anything. I know, but I want to anyway. The summer passed in a blur of work. Elena and Wade prepared for the cattle drive, managed the ranch, built their life together. Mrs. Callahan visited once, bringing baked goods and gossip from town. She looked around the new house, nodded approvingly, and told Elena she'd done well for herself. Better than well, Mrs. Callahan said. You've got a good man and a good life. Don't take it for granted. I won't. And when are you planning on giving me nieces and nephews to spoil? Elena felt her face heat. We haven't talked about that yet. Well, you should. You're not getting any younger. Wade laughed from across the room. Leave her alone, Martha. We'll get to it when we're ready. But that night, as they lay in bed, Wade said, Do you want kids? Elena turned to face him. Someday. Do you? Yeah, I do. But only if you do. Only if you're ready. Elena thought about it. About what it would mean to have children here, to raise them in this wild, beautiful place. It scared her, but it also felt right. I think I want to wait a little longer, she said. Get through another cattle drive. Make sure we're stable. But, yeah, someday I want that. Wade kissed her forehead. Someday sounds good. The cattle drive in September was everything Sarah had promised. Bigger, harder, longer. They were gone for 3 weeks, pushing a herd of over 100 cattle south through rough terrain. Elena managed the supply wagon again, but this time she also helped with the cattle when they were short-handed, learning to rope and cut and drive. It was brutal. Her hands blistered and bled. Her back ached constantly. She fell off her horse twice and got kicked by a steer once, leaving a bruise the size of a dinner plate on her thigh. But she loved it. Loved the challenge, the exhaustion, the satisfaction of pushing through when everything in her wanted to quit. Loved working alongside Wade, seeing the pride in his eyes when she handled something difficult. On the last night of the drive, as they sat around the fire, Sarah raised a flask. To the best damn crew I've ever worked with. Everyone cheered and passed the flask around. When it got to Elena, she took a sip, whiskey that burned all the way down, and handed it to Wade. You did good, he said quietly. So did you. They got paid at the end, $50 each. Elena stared at the money, hardly believing it. Combined with what they'd saved from the ranch, they had enough to buy more cattle, to expand, to really build something. On the ride home, Wade said, What do you want to do with your share? Elena thought about it. I want to send some to Margot, help her out, and I want to save the rest for when we have kids, so they'll have something. Wade smiled. I like that plan. When they got back to the ranch, everything felt different, clearer, like they'd crossed some invisible threshold and come out stronger on the other side. That winter was easier than the one before. They had more supplies, better systems, a house that kept them warm. Elena spent evenings writing letters to Margot, who'd started writing back regularly. Her sister's letters were full of news from Boston, who'd gotten married, who'd had babies, what their mother was up to. In one letter, Margot wrote, Mother asked about you yesterday. She wanted to know if you were happy. I told her you were. She didn't say anything, but I could tell it mattered to her. I think she misses you, even if she won't admit it. Elena showed the letter to Wade. Do you think I should write to her, to my mother? Do you want to? I don't know. Part of me does, but part of me is still angry. She didn't support me when I left, didn't try to understand. Wade was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "People make mistakes. They get scared and they react badly. Doesn't mean they don't love you." Elena knew he was right, and eventually she did write to her mother, kept it short, simple. Just let her know she was safe, that she was married, that she was building a good life. She didn't expect a response. But 2 months later, one came. Her mother's letter was stiff and formal, but underneath the proper language, Elena could feel the emotion. "I'm glad you're well," her mother wrote. "I wish you'd chosen differently, but I'm glad you're safe and happy. Perhaps someday you'll visit, and I can meet this husband of yours." Elena cried when she read it, not from sadness, but from relief. The door wasn't closed. There was still a chance to rebuild that relationship, even if it would take time. Spring came again, and with it, changes. Sarah McKinnon got married to a railroad man and decided to sell her ranch. She offered Wade and Elena first pick of her cattle at a good price, and they bought 20 head, nearly doubling their herd. Elena found out she was pregnant in April. She'd suspected for a few weeks, but when the doctor confirmed it, the reality hit her all at once. She was going to be a mother. She was going to raise a child here, in this place she'd once thought was the end of her life. Wade's reaction was everything she'd hoped for. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing, then immediately set her down and apologized for spinning her. "I'm not made of glass," Elena said, laughing. "I know, but still, we have to be careful. We have 7 months to be careful. Right now, I'm fine." Mrs. Callahan was beside herself with excitement when she heard. She showed up at the ranch with blankets and baby clothes she'd been saving for years, insisting Elena take all of it. "You're going to be a wonderful mother," Mrs. Callahan said. "I hope so. I'm terrified." "Everyone is. But you'll figure it out. You always do." The pregnancy was harder than Elena expected. Morning sickness that lasted all day, exhaustion that made even simple tasks feel impossible, aches and pains she'd never experienced before. But Wade was patient and attentive, taking on extra work so she could rest, making sure she ate, holding her when she cried from frustration. "I feel useless," Elena said one particularly bad day. "You're growing a person. That's not useless. I can't do anything. Can't help with the ranch. Can't. You're doing the most important thing there is." Wade put his hand on her belly, which was just starting to show. "You're giving us a family." Elena covered his hand with hers. "I'm scared I'm going to mess it up, that I won't know how to be a good mother." "You'll be great. I know you will." "How do you know?" "Because you don't give up. Even when things are hard, even when you're scared, you keep going. That's what being a good parent is." Elena wanted to believe him. And slowly, as the months passed and her body changed and she felt the baby move inside her, she started to. The baby came in November, a week before the first snow. Labor was long and brutal, 18 hours of pain that left Elena exhausted and shaking. But when the midwife finally placed the baby in her arms, all of it faded away. A girl, tiny and red-faced and perfect. Wade stood beside this bed, tears streaming down his face, staring at his daughter like she was a miracle. "What should we name her?" Elena asked. Wade thought for a moment. "What about Rose? After my mother." "Rose Callahan," Elena smiled. "I like it." They named her Rose Eleanor Callahan, and she became the center of their world. The first few months were chaos. Rose cried constantly, slept only in short bursts, needed feeding every few hours. Elena was exhausted beyond anything she'd ever experienced. There were nights she sat in the rocking chair, holding her screaming daughter, and wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. But then Rose would quiet down, would look up at Elena with wide, curious eyes, and Elena would feel a love so fierce it scared her. Wade was an unexpected natural with the baby. He'd rock her to sleep, sing to her in a low, rumbling voice, change her diapers without complaint. Elena watched him with Rose and fell in love with him all over again. One night, when Rose was about 3 months old, Elena sat on the porch while Wade walked around the yard with the baby, trying to get her to sleep. The stars were out, bright and endless, and the air smelled like pine and earth. Mrs. Callahan came by the next day and found Elena hanging laundry with Rose strapped to her chest in a sling. "Look at you," Mrs. Callahan said. "Working mother." "I don't have much choice. The work doesn't stop just because I have a baby." "No, it doesn't. But you're managing. Elena adjusted the sling. Some days better than others. That's life. Some days are good, some are hard. But you keep going. Is that your philosophy? It's everyone's philosophy. They just don't always admit it. That summer, when Rose was 8 months old, Elena got another letter from Margot. This one included a surprise. A photograph of their mother sitting in the parlor in Boston, looking older but still proud. She wanted me to send this, Margot wrote. She says she'd like to meet her granddaughter someday. I told her maybe you could visit, or maybe she could come there. I don't know if that will ever happen, but I thought you should know she's thinking about it. Elena showed the photograph to Wade. Do you think we could go? To Boston? Someday? If you want to. Might be a while before we can afford the trip, but yeah, someday. Elena looked at the photograph again, at her mother's stern face, and felt a mix of emotions. Anger, sadness, longing. But underneath it all, hope. Maybe someday they could rebuild what had been broken. Maybe not completely, but enough. Rose grew fast. By her first birthday, she was walking, babbling, getting into everything. She had Wade's dark hair and Elena's green eyes, and a personality that was entirely her own, stubborn, curious, fearless. Elena watched her daughter explore the ranch, chasing chickens and petting horses and picking wildflowers, and felt a pride she couldn't put into words. This was what she'd built. This life. This family. This home. It wasn't the life she'd planned. Wasn't the life she'd thought she wanted when she'd stepped off that stagecoach all those years ago. It was better. 2 years later, they had a son, named him Samuel after Wade's father, and 2 years after that, another girl, Lily. The ranch grew along with the family. They added more cattle, built another barn, hired 2 full-time hands to help with the work. Elena taught piano lessons to children in town, bringing in extra money and giving her a connection to the community. Wade finished building a schoolhouse on the property so the kids wouldn't have to ride into town every day. Elena taught them herself, reading, writing, arithmetic. Rose was sharp as a tack, always asking questions. Samuel was quieter but thoughtful. Lily was wild, fearless, always covered in dirt. They were perfect. Imperfect and exhausting and perfect. One evening in late summer, after the kids were in bed, Elena and Wade sat on the porch of their house. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. You ever think about that day at the depot? Wade asked. Elena smiled. Sometimes. Feels like a lifetime ago. You were so lost, so scared. I was. I thought my life was over. And now? Elena looked out over the ranch, at the house they'd built, the land they'd worked, the life they'd created. Now I know it was just beginning. Wade took her hand. I'm glad I found you that day. I'm glad you did too. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun disappear behind the mountains. And Elena thought about everything that had brought her here. The betrayal, the fear, the struggle. All of it had led to this moment, to this life, to this family. She thought about Thomas sometimes, wondered where he'd ended up, if he'd ever found what he was looking for. But mostly, she didn't think about him at all. He was just a person who'd been part of her story for a little while. Not the villain, not the hero, just someone who'd made a choice that changed everything. And in a strange way, she was grateful. Because if he hadn't left her at that depot, she never would have met Wade. Never would have discovered who she really was. Never would have built this life. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing. That's not poetry. That's just truth. Years passed. Rose grew up and married a rancher's son from the next county over. Samuel took over most of the ranch work as Wade got older. Lily became a teacher, traveling to different towns, always coming home for holidays. Elena's mother did eventually visit when Rose was 10. It was awkward at first. 2 women who barely knew each other anymore, trying to find common ground. But her mother held Rose and Samuel and Lily, and Elena saw tears in her eyes. You did well, her mother said quietly. You built a good life. I did. I'm sorry I didn't support you. When you left? Elena was surprised by the apology. Thank you for saying that. I was scared. I thought you were making a mistake. But I was wrong. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was a start. Wade's hair turned gray at the temples, then white. He moved slower, his joints aching from years of hard work. But he was still strong, still steady, still the man who'd helped her when she had nothing. Elena aged too. Her hands grew rough, her face lined from years in the sun. But she didn't mind. Every line, every callus told a story. One autumn afternoon, when they were both in their 50s, Elena stood on the porch, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. Rose's two boys, chasing each other around, shrieking with laughter. Wade came up beside her, moving a little stiff but still solid. "What are you thinking about?" "Everything, nothing, I don't know." She leaned against him. "Do you ever regret it? Any of it?" "Not for a second." "Not even the hard parts?" "Especially not the hard parts. Those are what made it real." Elena thought about that. About the cattle drives and the blizzards and the sleepless nights with sick children. About the fights and the fears and the moments when she'd wanted to give up. None of it had been easy, but all of it had mattered. "I love you," she said. Wade kissed the top of her head. "I love you too." They stood there together, watching the sun set over the mountains, and Elena felt a peace that went bone deep. This was home. Not the house, not the land. This. Wade's hand in hers, their family growing around them. The life they'd built from nothing. She'd come to Montana broken and lost, thinking her story was ending. But really, it had just begun. And here's what she'd learned, what she'd carry with her until her last breath. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find out who you really are. Sometimes betrayal is just the universe pushing you toward the life you were meant to live. Sometimes the person who saves you isn't a knight in shining armor. It's just someone who shows up, who stays, who sees you for who you really are and loves you anyway. Life doesn't hand you guarantees. It doesn't promise you easy or fair or perfect. But if you're brave enough to keep moving forward, even when you're terrified, even when everything's falling apart, you might just build something worth keeping. Elena Cross had been a scared girl from Boston who thought she needed a man to save her. Elena Callahan was a woman who'd saved herself and built an empire doing it. That was the story. That was the truth. And it was enough.